قدرت لك والملك لا شريك لك لبيك.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How is everybody doing? Today we're back here, not at the typical place. We're not at the studio today. We're outside enjoying the summer, Minnesota summer weather, right? When it lasts, you got to take advantage of it, right?
Yes,
Winter is coming.
Yes, you do.
So today we have a very, very, very special guest with us. Somebody that's local, but we have not gotten the opportunity to get a hold of him until now. I did not know you were local.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly speaking.
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so you've been here for a very long time. It seems like just speaking for a little bit of 5 minutes, you know a lot of people that I know.
Yes, we do, yep.
So,
well, you guys are a little younger than me. So I was around, I was in Saudi for a little bit of time.
Okay.
And probably when you guys got into Dawah and this type of thing was around the time I was in Saudi. And since I came back, I've been busy building my career, busy with family.
Of course.
This happens when you get into your 30s, just so you know.
Major. So we got Michael Abraham with us today, a really, really special guest. Wrote a book called Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. Zoom this in, it looks right there. So yeah, we'll put the screenshot up too so that people can really access this book. I'm trying to take this copy right here today because I need this knowledge more than anybody else, most likely. If I'm speaking on these issues, we really need to be educated on it. So brother Michael Abraham, I usually love to say Ibrahim, but now I have to say Abraham.
As you like.
Is it okay?
That's not my, and I became Muslim 15 years ago.
Oh,
and
okay.
my paternal lineage is Syrian.
Oh.
So Abraham is my birth name. It's not, I didn't choose that as my Muslim name or anything.
Beautiful.
It's my father's last name, my grandfather's last name.
Beautiful.
And it has roots in my Arab ancestors who came here 3 generations ago.
Beautiful. So today we're going to be discussing engaging Muslim students in public schools, how we can raise our kids in this society, protect them in these public schools, and all the dangers surrounding the environment. And so the first thing we want to do is get to know Michael Abraham and really get to the foundation of it. Michael, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Jazakumullah khairan for having me. It's a pleasure to be out here with you guys today.
For sure. It's really, we love to have an expert on a topic like you. And this is a very sensitive topic. There is really not much of an awareness on it. Because back in the day when we were going to public school, it wasn't as bad as it is now. Because right now it's extremely dangerous. Yeah. A dangerous environment. So a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in Minnesota?
Yeah, I did. I'm born and raised here. My family's from New York State originally. I lived in New Jersey for a little bit growing up, but I was born here, moved back, all that type of thing. From the south suburbs here, not too far where we're from. So my original degree was in political science. And, as I was saying, I'm from a non-Muslim family, but my father's an Arab Christian. So I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And during the whole time of the war on terror, this type of thing, that changed my life a little bit at that point, just because it had me thinking more about the fact that I was Arab. And, when my father's grandfather immigrated to this country. So by the time, with Arab Christian immigrants who came in the early 20th century, by the time you get to my father's generation, let alone mine, the Arab identity is pretty much gone, except for some of the food that he eats, this type of thing. So my father's just like a totally Americanized guy. So, after 9/11 and all that stuff started happening, I wanted to learn more about what was really going on. Of course. So I did a degree in political science at the University of Minnesota, and at first I was studying law, but I switched to concentrating on the history of the Muslim world, especially in the 20th century. So once you start studying that, it becomes pretty clear you have to learn about this religion everyone practices in that part of the world. So alhamdulillah, I learned about it, and it struck me as the truth very much. I won't go through the whole story. But
were you always cognizant about your Arab lineage?
Yeah, I always knew about it, but, you're only connected to it in these weird ways because those early 20th century immigrants, they were heavily incentivized to assimilate as soon as possible. And actually, I write about it a little bit in the book, actually, because I go through the history of Muslim immigration in the country, because there was a few Muslim immigrants from the Arab world at that time. But Arab immigrants at that time, there's actually a debate over whether or not they were going to be considered white people when they came, and they were heavily incentivized to land on the white side of that debate, especially at that time. So they were like, we're American, want to assimilate as soon as possible. So again, my father he doesn't speak Arabic, didn't speak Arabic with me or anything like that. He eats grape leaves and kibbeh and this type of stuff. But aside from that, I didn't know anything about it. The first time I can remember being connected to it was when Desert Storm happened in the early 90s. And they'd show Iraq on the map there, and then Syria would be next to them. My father would be like, oh, that's where my grandfather's from. And it's kind of like, well, why are our ancestors from the places where the bad guys are from? I can remember thinking that type of thing,
Of course.
But I wouldn't say I was too connected to it. And also, too, I didn't grow up around my extended family either. So, my father, he grew up around his aunts and uncles, all that type of stuff. He had a little more connection that way. But no, I grew up kind of isolated from it in that regard. So I had to go just seek it out. And, I did not accept Islam because I'm Arab or anything like that.
No.
I've had that conversation with some family members.
Right.
It's like, well, if, you want to get connected, why don't you come to the Orthodox Church with us? It's like, no, that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
But, but it so happened to be the route that led me to learn about Islam.
So your mom and your dad were both Arab Christians?
No, my mother's not Arab. My father is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my mother's Roman Catholic.
Oh,
Okay.
But
So
she's probably a Minnesotan.
Actually, both of them are from New York State originally.
Okay.
So, in the late 70s, early 80s, Minnesota's economy was really booming.
Yeah.
So they came out here actually for jobs. That's how they came here.
Makes
So
sense.
transplanted Minnesota.
So the first person from your family to come to America was your grandfather.
Yeah, my father's grandfather, my great-grandfather.
Oh, wow. That's pretty back.
We're talking like 1910, 1911 around
So
here.
since we're on this topic, because I don't think we're going to have another opportunity to get back to it, we have a lot to discuss here. But maybe you know this about this more than I do. I was just researching things passingly. Was the immigrants, the Syrian and the Lebanese immigrants to Minnesota?
Yeah.
And I think which city was that?
Michigan?
Was that no here in Minnesota?
Egan?
Was it Egan?
Yeah, Egan. I mean, the regional park of Dakota County is
Yeah.
called Lebanon Hills.
Yeah.
That's because of Lebanese immigrants.
Right.
who
So
were
what's interesting is if you see them today, they're pretty much would be considered like white
Correct,
people.
yes,
They're
yes,
just white
yes.
people.
Yep.
But they have the lineage, and that's very interesting. Is because nowadays when Arabs do come over from the Middle East here, they do have some opportunity based off of where they're going to still retain their culture or some level of it. But I can imagine at that time, since there was nobody else, and they were like the first people, just like, you know what?
Correct.
We're just giving up.
Yep.
I mean, they do it today too. Don't get me
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
It's like,
It's like the Bosnians. The Bosnians when
Yep.
they were first brought here.
Very similar.
oh yeah, Bosnians too.
Very
Something,
similar.
yeah.
Yeah.
The Bosnian
But
Muslims.
Bosnians, they could really pass off for like.
Oh,
if you
big
meet
time.
Muslim Bosnians here,
Yeah.
it's like you wouldn't even know unless they tell you or you know
That's
their last
true.
name.
Yeah.
Like, so SubhanAllah.
SubhanAllah. Well, anyways, that's really, that's quite the,
Yeah.
you're the first person I've ever seen that's fourth generation.
I've met some others. I've met some
Oh,
others.
you've met some
it's
others?
It's not a zero phenomenon.
No, it's a
That's just
it's
to me.
I think it could be somewhat common.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and actually I tell this to Somalis as well, and actually some people will compare the Somali immigration to immigrants of the early 20th century.
yeah.
And 2000 to 2010 was actually the highest period of immigration in the United States, and
Right.
definitely of Muslim immigrants.
Of course.
The general pattern of immigrant communities when they come to America is they're very, very tight-knit in the first generation, the beginning. Everyone
course.
lives in the same neighborhood.
yep,
they have
yep.
all the family together.
Of course.
Then over time, the community increases in socioeconomic status,
Yeah.
but the community itself basically dissipates.
Yes.
SubhanAllah.
yes.
So you can probably
That's the
see,
pattern. We're seeing some of it right
Correct.
now in these younger
SubhanAllah.
generations.
Correct.
Definitely. It's,
And what people need to be reminded of, what makes Somali immigrants different, there's lots of things that make them different, but the main thing that makes them different is they have Islam.
they have Islam
yeah.
and they're stubborn. they're very stubborn.
So that helps as well.
Hey, what are you trying
Like
to
this
say,
guy,
man?
That helps as
no,
well.
like the interesting about Somali people is like if they're like sinners, they'll go off and they'll go drink alcohol, but they'll never leave Islam. Like they'll be like, "What?" and they'll fight you about that. So it's interesting. So SubhanAllah.
So how did you get into the field of education? I know you went to school for political science. How did you get into education?
Yeah, so I got into education before I ever studied in academia, because when I
Okay.
finished my bachelor's degree, I went to Saudi Arabia because I wanted to work in the Middle East, wanted to go to the Muslim world. I'd become Muslim since then. And the jobs that were available at the time were English teaching jobs
course,
abroad.
yeah.
So I ended up at a school in Jeddah that was actually a Saudi private elementary school that was trying to implement an American-style curriculum. So oddly, I ended up learning a lot about American education while I was in Saudi, and that was where I began
That's
teaching.
ironic.
You weren't a Muslim then?
I was Muslim.
Oh, you were
I was
Muslim. Okay, okay.
So had been Muslim about 3 years when I went to Saudi.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So,
Yeah. How's your Arabic then?
It's not that great. It's not that great. And there were some brothers like going to Medina, the Jamia, and this type of thing at that time. So I kind of wanted to do that and do the Talib al-Ilm route, but I never got to. So I didn't. And I had, I married my girlfriend from before I was Muslim. I married her when I became Muslim.
Okay.
So I started having children, that type of thing. So I had to, I had to get a job. I had to get a job, all this type of stuff.
Responsibility.
So I mean, when I was in Saudi, I was actually working day and night. Teaching kids in the daytime and adults in the evening time.
Wow.
So I really got thrown in the deep end in teaching and had to learn to survive in that.
Yeah.
I came back after 3 years. I was there on a 3-year contract. Then when I got back, I got a job at a charter school that was actually just up the street here.
Wow.
And alhamdulillah, they hired me without having a teaching license. I got hired on a variation license, and I worked there for 3 years while doing my teaching license here.
Okay.
And I actually got very good at teaching there, both through the support of that school, but also because I was teaching while studying the license. Everything I learned, I was able to implement.
Right.
And I was able to kind of see like what works and what doesn't work. And there's a lot that doesn't work that they teach us being good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, big time. So that's how you got in.
Correct.
And then eventually, how long were you in the? I know you went from school to school. You told me you were in South High School also.
Yeah, for a
many
little
of the
bit.
popular schools here.
Yep.
How did you transition throughout?
So after finishing my license at the charter school, I switched into Minneapolis Public Schools. But from the moment I came into education here in America, I recognized that there was opportunity to teach people about Islam within it.
Okay.
Because number one, the field of professional development in education is just a really big thing. Every teacher who gets a license, you're required to do a certain amount of hours of professional development in order to renew your license. Pretty much every state has it stipulated now that some of those hours have to be devoted to learn about multiculturalism. Because there's been big multiculturalism movement in education type of stuff.
Yeah.
And there's good and bad things about these movements within education. But, what Muslims need to do is to try to take the bull by the horns and influence it the way that they want to.
Yeah.
So around that time when I was transitioning to Minneapolis Public Schools, I started developing this program. Because this was originally a training program, and it's still a training program that I do regularly with teachers by the same title. And I first did it, I drew it all up, wrote everything for it, used all my, and, even the fortunate thing, too, even before I was in teaching, I was studying Muslims per se in academia. So my academic career had always focused on studying Muslims in a way. So this book and this project is really the culmination of all that work, basically.
Okay.
Being in education, I mean, as you understand, there's really clear cultural clashes that take place.
Big time.
The way that they learn about multiculturalism in education, and most teachers here are not very well educated on it because most teachers they're not very well educated themselves, to be honest, especially if they only studied elementary education.
Yeah.
Because all you studied was elementary education. Like not every teacher's an ethnographer or anything like this.
Yeah.
So I mean, education tends to be more comfortable with having that type of learning, focusing on ethnicity and race.
Yeah.
But of course, with Muslim population of students, like you're really missing the big picture if you don't understand their religion.
Right.
Of course.
And that's pretty clear to a lot of teachers. They just have never been offered something that will show that to them.
Okay.
So, I put the program together, piloted it with Minneapolis Public Schools, did 2 cohorts of teachers with it there, and then just started offering it privately, reaching out to schools. And I had really high demand to it for it.
Mashallah.
And I expanded it to, this was before COVID, doing it in person.
Right.
I did it in Seattle a few times, did it in Columbus, Ohio, did it in those areas.
Very
And
nice.
now I have teachers taking it across the country. Have it as an online course. I do it live online. I have the book. So inshallah, it's
Really?
spreading. And now I've been online for a year trying to make the Muslims more aware of it so they can bring it into schools
Of course.
to educate the schools about their kids.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. So one of the first key things, I have different segments that we want to discuss since you've been teaching and now you're educating, educators on the topic, so on and so forth. Especially now, how have you seen for the public education system? What shift has it taken? Because
Well, I mean, it's along, the thing about the American public education system, it's not exactly the same in all places because American education is local first. By law, it's designed to be that way.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of forces that don't want it to be that way,
of course.
but those forces, they ultimately have to subvert the laws that make it local first.
Of course.
So, the biggest trend over the 20 years in education has been tending to the fact that the American student population has experienced a huge demographic shift.
Okay.
Like, even just Bloomington where we are,
Yeah.
or Egan, Apple Valley, these cities around here,
Yeah.
probably at the turn of the century, they were somewhere from 80 to 90% white kids. Now they're at about 50% white kids.
Wow.
And
That's
it
a
is
big shift.
Yep, and it's primarily the children of immigrants who have driven that change. And, here in Minnesota, that's primarily, there's lots of Latino immigrants too, but
course,
the Somali population has a huge part in that.
Of course, yeah.
So what people need to understand, what the community needs to understand, that's actually a huge source of power for the Muslim community.
Really?
Yes, correct. Because every school in America, they're facing some sort of school competition right now.
Of course.
Your charter schools, private schools,
Yeah.
a huge increase in homeschooling going on. And I don't encourage Muslim families to send their kid to public school. I think they should homeschool, send to Islamic school
Yeah.
as they could.
Yeah.
But most families aren't doing that.
No.
And even the families that do, their kids represent tax dollars to their local school. Because how much money a school gets is directly related to how many kids that they have in the
course.
school.
Correct.
So if you have a group of students, or you have a community of students who are either unhappy with the school or they're taking their kids out of the school, that represents money that you're losing.
Of
I
course.
mean, that's just the money aspect too. So schools, they have pressure coming from all different types of directions, but pressure from parents and families is usually a pressure that they'll be really, really responsive to.
Right.
It's very unsatisfying being in a school working where the families are unhappy with you and where the parents are unhappy with you.
Is there a difference? I've always wondered the difference between living in a liberal state or a conservative state.
Yeah, I think so, and even that is something that I continue to research.
Yeah.
I've only been in liberal states. One thing there is somewhat of a difference just in the Muslim community itself, as far as how the Muslim community relates to schools.
Yeah.
Because the liberal states tend to have more communities with a refugee background.
Okay.
Whereas the southern states and the Republican states, it's more just professional class immigrants who came there.
That's true.
So that can affect, the way that the school system looks at the population.
Of course.
It can affect how quickly the demographics change. Because like here, the demographics change relatively quickly.
Fast, yeah.
So compared to what you're looking at. So that's one change. I would say too, you're probably going to have more activism and this type of thing within the
course.
school system in the liberal states.
Yeah.
And there is very negative things in that people need to watch out for. I will say, too, though, that liberals are probably a little more open-minded to learning about people who are not like them than conservative states.
Of course.
And I have reached out in places like Texas and Georgia and conservative states. I get way more response to do my training and read my book from places in the liberal states.
Of course.
Yeah.
I heard in conservative states the money follows the kid. Meaning
That's everywhere.
But not here. Not if the kid goes to a private school.
Yeah, no, it does. Well, look, there's two.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, there's two primary sources where a district school is going to get funds
Okay.
for their operation.
Okay.
One is the state government, the other is property taxes. Okay.
Okay.
So that's part of why higher socioeconomic status places.
Big role.
Yeah, they have more stuff.
Yeah.
And charter schools, they will usually only get funding from the state. Okay. Now, if you take your kid, if you are in Bloomington here and you open enroll your kid into Egan,
Yeah.
the money that the school here in Bloomington would have gotten from the state, they won't get it for that kid.
No.
They'll get the school in Egan where you send him will get it.
Okay.
So there's a direct relationship between the enrollment that a school has and the amount of money that they get.
Okay, but what I was trying to say was, if I open a private school and the local, let's say a private school in Bloomington, and the kids come to me, the money that the state would have given to them
Oh
for them
yeah,
to
I
go
see
to
what you're
public
saying.
school,
I'm sorry.
I don't think it will come to
Yeah,
a private
yeah.
school.
Okay, this could be something that's changing.
Okay.
But yes, what you're referring to, that's called vouchers. So
Okay.
yes, a lot of the southern states, actually Wisconsin has a voucher system.
Wisconsin has a system.
And Ohio does as well.
Yeah.
So it really changes state to state. But yeah, there's some states where religious private schools can get tax money through the voucher system. Now, a recent case, I actually have a podcast on this with Ismail Royer on my YouTube channel, Abraham Education.
Okay.
There was a Supreme Court case over the summer ruling on a case in Maine that actually stipulated that when you have a neutral public benefit available to anyone from any private citizen from the public,
Yeah.
the state essentially can't discriminate against religious institutions in offering that. Now, why that's significant, charter schools are not branches of the government, but they are publicly funded. They're schools started by private citizens where they go through the process of being able to start a school. But they don't have like a school board that's a branch of the government or anything that funds them. So right now, the way that states with charter school systems, which is 46 of the 50 states, all understand that is, well, religious schools don't count in that. But this most recent Supreme Court ruling has essentially set the precedent that if a state says that, it's going to be against the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Wow.
So, this whole aspect is actually something that the society is waiting for a religious institution or a charter school itself to try and challenge.
Yeah.
So if you know someone who runs a charter school around here, suggest to them that they try petitioning to their authorizer and to the state that, hey, we want to start having Islamic studies during the day, and you can't, because of this new Supreme Court ruling, you gotta get a lawyer and stuff on their side, and all this type of thing. But but the precedent is actually set for countrywide voucher systems under the charter school system, essentially.
Wow.
See, this is the type of information that we need, because the only way the community will survive here is if we protect
100%.
and bring our kids to good, safe
Because
schools.
originally charter schools have to be hands off, like religion and so things like that. In public schools, it could be taught under like history or something like that. But charter schools are a little bit more sensitive. Also, we've been seeing a lot of Somalis open up charter schools.
Correct.
Here. And
The
so
state is actually primed for this type of thing.
Yeah,
I'd say the state maybe needs it the most.
Okay.
Okay.
So what are the pros and cons, or the good things and the bad things you've seen from these
Charter.
From charter schools?
Up of charter schools?
Well, the thing about it is, I think that the reason the community did that, and I talk about this at length in my book, like there's certain issues that the community could not resolve with the district schools and the schools that they didn't have ownership over. And those schools are just reluctant to give the community ownership in a big way. One of those things like being birthday celebrations. Like we had a generation of Muslim kids here, conditioned into celebrating their birthday, predatories in their birthday. I've seen it in elementary school.
Yeah.
It's a huge thing elementary schools do. When's the kid's birthday? Let's put the star when their birthday is.
Yeah.
And birthday comes around, we're gonna sing happy birthday, all that type of thing. Music class, celebrations around holidays, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
The community couldn't properly educate the districts on this. The districts probably at the time they came weren't more open to learning about this. And it's something that, teaching people about Islam is a deep thing.
It's very deep.
The good thing about the professional development system is I'm able to get a captive audience. That is something that's actually really key to educating the society about Islam here.
Yeah.
Because it can't always be reacting to some type of conflict or trying to inject ourselves into the non-Muslims conversations or this type of thing. So the nice thing about in public school teachers, they don't really have a personal interest in learning about Islam, but they do have a professional interest in learning about it. So, a big thing I talk about in the book and the training is all these problems that have been going on that a lot of the educators don't even know exist below the surface. So, I think the community, when they started all the charter schools at the time, the hope was, well, if we just keep the kids together, we just keep them in the same place, we keep them away from the non-Muslims, that will give us some modicum of control over their assimilation.
Yeah.
And, maybe that happened to a degree, but in other ways it hasn't happened to a degree.
No.
Because, a big disadvantage, first of all, that charter schools have is they don't usually have as much funding as the district schools. One, because they are usually not getting funding from the property taxes. They're usually only getting money from the state. Second thing, too, is, a district school, like Bloomington Public Schools here, they own all the property where their schools are on. So they don't need to pay rent to themselves or the state or anything for their place. But a charter school usually has to pay rent, or they have to try and buy the building wherever they are, that type of thing. So they have extra expenses and less money to do it with. Now, what that results in is charter schools usually are hiring young and experienced teachers, and they usually have a lot of turnover with teachers. That is something that can really affect the efficacy of an educational institution a lot when you have people going in and out all the time. Also, too, I think teaching classrooms that are almost all Somali kids was a dynamic that the teaching force here in Minnesota was not ready for in general. It's funny, but Minnesotans, they're maybe the most socially introverted people on earth, and Somalis are the complete inverse of that.
That's so true.
So Somali kids, when you have a large group of Somali kids, or you have a classroom with all Somali kids in the classroom, they usually know each other very, very well outside the classroom.
Immediately.
Correct. And whatever social, interaction that they have going on, they just continue whatever goes on outside the classroom
Inside
right
the
into the
class.
classroom.
Yeah.
So you actually have to have some really specific skills in order to teach a population of students that is highly social like that.
Yeah.
So, and these are some of the things I go over in my training as well. There are things that in education that have been that tend to that actually. But it's not the stuff that is most commonly taught. And it's not the stuff most commonly taught in teacher education. These are some of the secular aspects of my book and my program that teachers really appreciate.
Yeah.
Some of those things, too, I've actually gone over on my YouTube channel because some of those things involve parenting skills that are really good as well that Muslims in general need.
Yeah.
And on Abraham Education, it's another thing people can go to. I have a parenting course on there now. If they look in the playlist, it's called Parenting Skills Muslims Need.
No, that's necessary because in this society you have to adapt.
Correct, yeah.
You can't just have the same way you used to do things because you're not in the same place you used to be, right? So that's very important. No, mashallah.
But it's been a big thing because I mean, I don't know what the sense you guys have is, but the sense I have is, over the past 20 years, like there's been a fair amount of animosity developed between the community and the public school system.
Really?
I mean, I feel that way.
Of course,
I mean,
of course.
one on the community's end having all these issues that they can't reconcile.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Why they started the charter
Parents are
school
taking
system.
their kids out and
Yeah.
they're trying to take them somewhere
Yeah,
else.
and I mean, sometimes even they can't take their kids out, but they don't, they don't totally know what to do.
And no better alternative.
Yeah, but and then on the education system side, like if they had this change in demographics go on in their student population that they weren't properly prepared for, you've had lots of teachers be frustrated with teaching those kids. And
It's very tough.
it's just not good for the community overall.
No, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
I don't support charter schools. I'm against it to a certain extent because quality of education is bad. You have the same curriculum as the public education system most of the time, correct?
Yeah, I mean, curriculum is kind of a curriculum can change place to place. First of all, there's no federally set curriculum in the United States.
It's arbitrary.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is actually against the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution.
That's interesting.
To have a federally set
know
education.
that.
So it's very much state by state.
Okay.
What the states do mostly, though, is they adopt what you call standards. Standards are like the articulation of skills that kids are supposed to have by the end of each grade level. Now, the thing about, honestly, one of the worst things about public education right now is, honestly, kids don't learn much of anything in public education.
No, they don't.
And part of that is because the trend that has been going on since the 1990s in public education is to make the curriculum what they call skills-based, which means that it's not knowledge-based. Part of that is because in America, knowledge itself is politicized when it's in the public education system. Like if you teach about this side is going to be mad about it. If you teach about that side's going to be mad about it. So on a higher level, what the public education system has done is it just tries to talk about teaching these general reading skills or these general math skills, and the actual knowledge contained in it is removed. So and there's not a whole lot of research that backs that is an effective way of teaching. This is another thing I go over in my book. And the result of it is kids aren't actually learning much of anything in schools. They're not learning knowledge, and you have an education system where they don't even think about teaching as transmitting knowledge to people.
I think I've learned more outside of school
Lots
than
of people
I
have
did.
that
So, because then I had to kind of teach myself about things and kind of re-educate, I would say. And to be fair, I mean, I wasn't like the best student either. So, there's that whole little,
Of course,
just especially high school is just that era where you're just, hey man, let me just enjoy my life right now. So it's that also gets in the way. Yeah.
So
Do you ever remember learning about like identifying the main idea or this type of thing? That type of learning is a bunch of garbage. Like that.
what's the main idea of the story?
Well, the thing is, that's the theory, the educational theory that underlies education right now. You can just teach the general concept of finding the main idea in a reading, and once you get that in a child's brain, well, then they'll be able to find the main idea in anything that they read. So therefore, what you actually are reading in school, it doesn't even matter what you're reading. What matters is that they have to identify the main idea. But the thing is, whether or not you can find the main idea of an article is directly linked to how much background knowledge you have about the information in that article.
So true.
And two, also, when you conceptualize education nowadays, actually a big problem I see these days is they'll bring articles reading about something from pop culture. So let's read about this movie that came out, or let's read an article comparing this rapper to that rapper, or this type of thing. That type of stuff is pretty widespread in education these days because there's not actual focus on kids learning real knowledge, because real knowledge is politicized. So lots of people are getting a bad education in America because of this.
Okay, that's some really, really good stuff. Let's transition into the Muslim students and what they're facing on a day-to-day basis on the public school system. Let's start with maybe music. How has that impacted the Muslim community, and what can be done to kind of like, what can parents do to make sure their kids are not exposed to
a music class and
so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, these things are difficult. First of all, parents have a right to essentially withdraw their kids from anything that they don't want them partaking in. So
a lot of Muslim parents don't know
I know a lot of parents are aware about that. And actually, too, going back to the Supreme Court, sometimes rights that you have change a little bit in America based on the court system, also based on what district court you're in. There's some variation laws in that. But the Supreme Court that we have right now heavily favors parental rights in education. So that's something that we should proactively take advantage of.
That's good.
So any parent that has any issue with a particular music class or anything like that, they can take their kids out.
They can take their kids out. And I address this specifically in my book, so they can give them that too.
Perfect.
And I put this together to comprehensively educate about these types of things. But, look, a lot of schools where there's a majority Muslim kids, they've kind of figured this out. And now they're not offering music classes anymore. That's happened in a few. I would say, though, in schools where they are not the majority, this is common. And especially in elementary school, they just assume that kid's going to take music class.
Right.
So it's a huge thing, and there needs to be proactive education about it.
What was the point of adding music classes in the whole education system to begin with? I mean, who was at the table said, you know what, we need to add music? What education?
Music? Western civilization's whole idea about a liberal education is that it's going to be well-rounded. So you're going to look at all these different types of things, And I mean, that began. Christianity has a strong relationship with music.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Singing and choir and stuff in Christianity is a whole part of it.
It's a major thing.
So really, it transitioned from then. So it's really always been around in the American and Western education system.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's very, very good for parents to know. What about sex education? I think this is the new and the most deadliest of classes that's been on the table for the last 5-6 years. I'm hearing even preschool to kindergarten, they're being exposed to sexual images and so on and so forth. What are your
well, this is without a doubt the number one issue that Muslims ask me about by far and away. It's
also in your book, though.
Yes, I do talk about. Well, look, the thing is, what Muslim families can do and should do, and that's what I say in the book, they need to insist that the school holds educational seminars for the family where they inform them very clearly what they are going to be educating about these things.
I think that's a good idea. The parents come together, and that's that mobilizing power there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the thing about this issue, again, different states have different laws pertaining to it. Okay. There's, the states right now that are the worst, it appears to be the West Coast states, like California, Oregon, and Washington, especially I'd say Massachusetts. It's just not good either.
Oh, God.
So and actually, I don't remember them off the top of my head. I do have a video that I did with a YouTuber whose name's Mr. Middlepath. I did a podcast with him on this. There's, I think, 9 states where they have, not every state even has sex education, actually, as part of their state law.
Curriculum,
And the ones that do, they have varying degrees to how much they teach about it. Some of them teach abstinence only. Some of that, there's 4 states where they explicitly cannot teach about homosexuality, and they even have to teach that it is a negative form of sexual behavior.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Those states.
Interesting. A teacher cannot teach sex education without highlighting those points.
Correct. Like it's part of their AIDS awareness curriculum that you have to teach that homosexual behavior is a negative health choice in those states.
Wow.
And now but in some states, certainly in California, they not only have sex education, but they have it stipulated that it has to be LGBT inclusive. And, of course, it's kind of open, each district can decide what that means.
Okay.
Now, usually they are supposed to take input from parents, but the person in charge of that in those districts is usually someone who's on board with the whole LGBT agenda.
Yeah, some political figure. Maybe.
Correct, exactly.
Even charter schools? Are they forced to follow that? standard?
At charter schools, a lot of times that changes state to state.
Yeah.
In the state of Washington, since we're talking about those states, charter schools are kind of a new thing. They weren't allowed there until only recently.
Yeah.
California's had them for a longer time. I don't know the specifics about this, but charter schools, they are often given the freedom to have variation in their curriculum compared to district schools, so long as they keep their test scores up.
Yeah.
The one area where that will not be the case is if there are graduation requirements connected to this.
Okay.
And California is a state, I believe, where they have made it's required. You take this specific type of sex ed course in high school. It has to be LGBT inclusive, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So California is a state where it's really hard to get away from. The thing is, though, this is the thing about it. Teachers in American schools actually have a lot of independence because of the teachers' unions. This is a whole thing people don't realize about education.
That's a very good
This
point.
is good. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, even when districts create curriculum, because people talk about, like, there's something recently about stuff. This is what Portland Public Schools is going to do with the kindergartners, this type of stuff. And it's bad stuff. But even when a district puts a curriculum together and they say to the teachers, here to use this, it only has the legal weight of a recommendation. And it really only functions as a recommendation to those teachers, because the contracts that those districts will have with the teachers union gives the teacher autonomy and gives them protection. It also gives them limited accountability. So this is both an opportunity and something to be aware of, because essentially any teacher in an American school, especially if they're a union and on a contract, and charter schools tend to not have teacher unions, but the teacher unions still, they set the kind of the environment, they set the tone for what's expected in the profession. These teachers have a lot of independence. So there have actually been studies that have been shown that even in these states where they require sex education to be LGBT inclusive, a lot of schools actually choose not to do it on the ground level, and even more so, teachers just choose on the ground level not to do it. Because usually as a teacher, you have a sense that it's not appropriate at the age level, this type of thing. Especially certain ages, you don't want those topics to come up at all.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's just going to be awkward and create disruptions, all this type of thing. But, on the flips, so teachers are protected in this regard.
Okay.
Now, on the flip side of that, if you have someone who's a teacher who is really all about this stuff, and they've entered the teaching profession because they want to push in this stuff, correct, and they're gonna do that. And look, parents need to try to go to kids' open house meetings and this type of thing. Usually schools host those.
Yes.
They need to try to get in there. They need to reach out to their kids' teachers,
They need to
say
know
that they'd like
who
to
they are.
volunteer sometime, and just express them that they want to come into the school.
Yes.
If a parent expresses that to a teacher and the teacher's like, no, that's not a good look for that teacher.
No.
A lot of times these teachers who are more on the activist bent of this type of thing, they'll have certain flags up.
Yeah.
They'll have a triangle a lot of times in the door, this type of thing, a rainbow triangle. That is something, there's an activist group called Gleason, GLSEN. It's like Gay Lesbian Straight Equity Network.
Okay.
They're heavily corporate funded. They're funded by Target, Disney, YouTube. They have a lot of money behind them. They will distribute to schools and teachers like these safe place triangles with the rainbow on it, and encourage teachers to put it up in the room that says this is a safe place, this type of thing. So sometimes teachers will have that up in the room.
It's like some Harry Potter stuff.
Oh my God.
Look, I will tell you, though, actually, one of the biggest areas for parents to be concerned about is with counselors in schools. Okay, counselors go through a little bit different training program than teachers.
That's interesting.
Counselors are heavily linked to the field of psychology and heavily linked to the field of social work.
Yes.
And this community that we are talking about, those are fields that they have really
influenced.
Yes,
Absolutely.
they've really entered
Absolutely.
and influenced a lot. So it is very likely that counselors in schools, they've had specific trainings over what to do if a kid bullies another kid based on sexual orientation or gender expression or this type of thing they're saying these types of days.
Yeah.
Or if that kid themselves feels that sort of way and they want to talk about it. They have specific protocols that aren't legal mechanisms necessarily, but they're things that they will say within their own field, well, this is best practice, this type of thing. If a kid bullies another kid based on that, a lot of times that might involve some sort of remedial education, which means teaching the kids things to try to change their mind about how they think about that.
See it, yes.
Correct.
And
So,
perceive it.
so it is important that parents understand that if your kid is bullying someone in the school or this type of thing, you put them at risk for that type of thing happening. A big part of what these protocols, especially that this group Gleason that I'm talking about puts out, they actually, you can look it up, they have like what they call a model policy framework. So they've like written up policies that they say this should be schools' policies towards LGBT kids or this type of thing.
Interesting.
In there, they say that if the kid expresses to you that they identify this way or that way, and they don't want their parents to know about it, you shouldn't tell the parents about it. So that is where that type of thing gets into it.
Okay.
So that's a big area for parents to be concerned about. And, you know, look, the thing is with Muslims educating the public education system, I don't really recommend, this is part of why I put the program together, because I don't really recommend that they start with these issues. Because it's a whole problem in educating people in general about Islam and our needs as Muslims to always be starting from an area of conflict.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you teach them about Islam properly, and especially that our religion is not something that we can just change based on our personal subjectivity, you know, you can kind of have a little different conversation around these things. And especially, again, with the trend, with the way things are going with the Supreme Court and with law in America, that's given us more leverage in terms of parents' rights and especially religious rights in the public school system.
So
No,
what? Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think that's a good idea. It's an important point to mention for parents not to start off that way in those area points.
Correct.
And which is interesting is you would do the same thing for da'wah. Like I remember there's a guy who's a construction worker, and he hadn't become Muslim, but he was talking about this, and he was like doing some work around the masjid, and so there was like some ants, and they were like forming like houses and whatever, and so that was interesting to him, and he kept looking at them, and so one of the uncles came and told the guy, the construction worker, you know, Prophet Solomon spoke to ants. Like that's not a good place to start for da'wah, right?
Right.
So you want the person to understand the comprehensive, have a comprehensive understanding of what your lifestyle, because that's what Islam is. Because when you say religion, most Westerners will think about it as something like, okay, this is something in the church, and it stays in the church, and when you leave your religious place, you're like us.
Correct.
But Islam is not that way.
No, it's not.
It's a comprehensive way of life, and it is something that, you know, subhanAllah.
I mean, you know, this is why I really had a passion for starting my project, because the thing is, we have to put Western society through an educational continuum in teaching people about Islam.
True.
Now, you know, again, how do you do that? You know, the public education system with professional development, it is an area where that can happen. The environment is right for it because of this emphasis I'm talking about on multiculturalism. You know, a big thing too in the schools, like preceding all this type of stuff, is the kids being asked to do things and inculcating habits that are shirk. You know, teachers telling kids to cross their fingers. You know, telling kids to knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
You know, a big thing around here that you know, there's things in the Minnesota education curriculum specific to teaching about Native American culture here in Minnesota and the Native American tribes here, which, you know, is fine for kids to learn about that. But sometimes they'll do this in Minneapolis. They'll do like a mock Native American powwow, which is a religious ceremony that the Native Americans will do, and they'll say, hey, all the kids, go join in, and all this type of thing. Yeah. There is so much stuff like that. And you know, you have parts where you learn about Greek mythology, and you learn about the ancient Roman gods and the ancient Egyptian gods and all this type of stuff. You know, the more creative that teachers try to get with the type of projects that they have kids do around that, the more it involves things that mimic it, or things or things that honor it, or this type of thing. So I mean, just that is a big thing that the education system needs to be taught about. The teachers need to be taught about.
I think teachers need to be taught about, but also our parents also need to be educated about how these things work as well. But I think some of the tips you're giving are very important, and we need to highlight those even more. Parents need to know who their teachers are, who's teaching their kids. They need to know the issue of school counseling and how that works, and they should be more involved in the schools.
Correct.
As much as they can. And I think, you know, it's sort of the same Duxie method where it's like, hey, I'm going to drop my kids off and go to work.
Yes.
Right? But even if you do that in Duxie, you know, that's not even recommended, right? You should be well aware of where your kids are doing and picking up, because if you don't, then somebody else.
No, that's asking for all kinds of problems with that. And I get it, you know, I mean, you know, especially for immigrant parents, there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with that. So it's been difficult for them. But, you know, a generational turn is starting to take place. And actually some of the younger parents out there and we have more and more parents who did grow up here themselves.
And they know.
Correct. And even though their kids might be the younger ones and they might be younger amongst the community of parents, they have to take the lead on this type
and they have
of
a
thing.
great opportunity actually to make that turn, that change.
100%.
That's true. So to conclude the sex ed part, what can parents do to actually, can they remove the kids out of those
They
type of
can.
classes
You can craft a letter to the school that lets them know that anything involving sex education, I want to know about it first, and I want to make a decision over whether or not my child's involved with it before that they are putting any education about that. They can let the school know about that with a letter beforehand. Another thing they can do as well is they can stipulate that they want to be informed and they want their consent sought before their child is given any services related to mental health or related to behavior remediation.
Yes.
That's like specialized counseling.
Okay.
Have you ever prepared this type of letter?
Well, actually, there is actually some conservative organizations in America who have done this.
Okay.
I did, again, if people look at the YouTube channel, Mr. Middle Path,
okay.
He's a small YouTuber. I did a podcast with him in December,
Okay.
and I went over some of those things in there. I am going to try to put more out about this on my own channel. Now, one of the things about
By the
this...
way, your channel is called Abraham Education.
Abraham
Yeah,
Education.
we'll have to link it down below.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jazakallah khair.
Yeah.
And, one of the things about this is some of the areas of parents' rights, like some of it has not fully played itself out in U.S. law.
Okay.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So some of it's not totally clear,
Yeah.
like the right that you do have. And different institutions might argue different things, and different schools might look at it different ways depending on the people that compromise them.
That's the thing, interpretation.
It is.
a big
But
part.
the thing about it is because the court system in America in general, especially the Supreme Court, has become more conservative recently, it's actually the right time to challenge these things.
That's true.
That's the thing about it. Now, most schools, I will say, they will not want to get into a court challenge with parents and this type of thing. That's the whole thing people have to understand. Most schools,
They're
most schools want their parents to be happy with what they are
That's
doing.
true.
By far and away, especially the administration in the schools. Because no principal wants to be in a situation where in the spring and budget time comes around, they're telling the staff, well, we got to reduce the staff by 20% next year because all these families are taking their kids out of the school. No administrator wants that. Again, this is a source of leverage that families have.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, too, immigrant parents in general, they tend to approach the education system like they have to prove themselves to the school or this type of thing, and they're worried about the school, how the school's going to view them and this type of thing, and they're worried about them calling the government on their kids or this type of thing, and there's some reasons why they have that concern.
Yeah.
But, in the suburbs, the white families, the upper class families in the suburbs, they treat the school like it's their service. Some of those parents, they email the teacher every day about what is going on.
You need to do this.
So it's not like teachers are unused to parents advocating for them this type of thing.
No, and then also it's important too, and you'll probably agree, is not only for you to voice those concerns, but to coordinate with other Muslim families.
100%.
That would be more powerful.
Actually, what I hope to do in the future is create a sort of criteria, or like a checklist of does the school do this type of thing, do they not do this type of thing, that can be like a comprehensive evaluation for the Muslim community to rate schools.
Yeah,
Do you get what I'm saying?
yeah.
So
Wow.
it's like, do they give the kids a place to pray? Do they have accommodations during fast?
Yeah,
that
we
type of
should
thing.
probably talk about that
do
too.
they inform families about sex education? Do they give you an explicit option to opt out? All that type of stuff. You put it out. You can have a rating system 1 through 5. Even the masajid, they could engage kids about what's going on in their schools to get some of this information. They can ask the schools directly.
Yeah.
And you can, in that way, too, give the schools the sense that the community is explicitly evaluating them. And that puts pressures on the schools as well. And believe me, there's other communities that do this type of thing.
I'm
There's
sure.
other communities that do this type of thing.
We're behind
pretty
big
sure.
time. When it comes to the next big thing that I wanted to discuss with you is a lot of Muslim kids are failing, or I wouldn't say failing, but they're behind in education.
Yes.
The basics of reading and math.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents are now actually spending a lot of money on Kuban or like places tutoring and so on and so forth. Why do you think this gap exists? Is it the language barrier? Is it
Yeah, well,
what are the
look,
elements?
it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
Look, to be honest, even more so than the LGBT stuff.
Yeah.
This is the biggest reason why I say to parents that they should take their kids out of public education.
Yeah.
There is really not a quality education going on for the most part in public education.
Interesting.
And I talk more about it in my book. There's a whole thing I'm trying to turn the public education system onto.
Yeah.
Flawed educational methods are rampant in public education. I did a podcast about this with Sajid Lippam last summer, and I have a re-uploaded onto my channel. It's called "How Progressive Education Ruined Education."
Yeah.
Okay.
So true.
It is, and so the thing about reading, like reading's just not taught well. It's not taught well in schools. And actually it begins in early elementary school by not teaching phonics explicitly enough.
Okay.
And you guys probably have some idea, the English language, it has more exceptions than Arabic. In Arabic, it's more perfectly phonetic than English.
Yeah.
But English, 80 to 85% of English is still based on a core of predictable phonetic rules. But what schools are, but the common methods and theories are that you teach sight words first. You teach the exceptions first. And that's actually confusing a lot of kids in the whole way that English is even supposed to be read. And that's really just one example of how bad education is. So I mean, the biggest reason for parents to take their kids out of the public education system is they're not getting a great education.
Yeah.
If parents themselves don't know how to bridge that gap at home, I mean, it's tough. So some of these tutoring programs are alternatives. Families, it's a good time to start looking at trying to do that type of education full time.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of teachers and programs that have developed out there, maybe teaching online, maybe teaching locally. And inshallah, in the future, there'll be more of these things sprouting up. But, the thing is, really, even if you are sending your kid to the public education system 5 days a week, you still have to take charge of their education.
True.
Yeah.
With reading in particular, if a family doesn't speak English, this is tough. But the best thing you can do with kids for reading is read to them from a young age.
Really? Like, what age do you think?
Like 3 months. Okay. Like as soon as they can soon as they can sit on your lap, and they sit on your lap and just have the book in front of them reading to them.
Yeah.
That just builds a positive association with reading in general with them, with the connection between the form of reading and the warmth of your body that they're getting from you as their parents. They'll also get just used to things like the intonation of reading and all that type of stuff.
That's true.
There are some kids who figure out how to read more or less before the age of 5 just from having their parents do that.
I mean, they learn reading just from listening to their parents.
Yes, and the parents showing them the text and guiding them through the text. No, that's not every kid, but it's something that is well known over long-term studies. A huge differentiator between people who read well and don't in adulthood is how early their own parents started reading with them. That is honestly the biggest thing the parents can do as far as reading.
What do you do with Muslim parents who are dealing with the original native language? Because a lot of parents, they don't want to lose their tradition and culture.
Correct, yeah.
So their main emphasis is actually making sure these kids hold on to their native tongue instead of teaching them a new tongue. So the kids are kind of like...
I actually think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
That is actually a good idea. It's best if it involves some literacy too.
Yeah.
Now the thing about kids who are multilingual, being multilingual is actually a huge advantage for you in long term. So, some of those kids, they won't be as strong academically in early elementary school.
Of course.
So I mean, that's just kind of something to know and grapple with.
Yeah, life is a trade-off.
Yeah, one thing I will say to parents, especially in Minnesota, they need to know about, because we have a lot of these kids who they're growing up and their parents don't speak English, but for all intents and purposes, English is their first language.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of those kids, they are still being classed as English language learners by the education system. Yes, correct. There's specific mechanisms that do that. I am not of the opinion that type of kid is best served by ESL classes. No. That kid is best served being in the mainstream classroom and being exposed to other kids who speak English well. Something that parents in Minnesota need to understand in particular, when they register their kid at a school, they will ask them to fill out something called a home language survey. That home language survey is kind of intentionally meant to be confusing. It has 4 different parts to it and like 3 different grades of answers you can give it.
Yeah.
If you indicate on that survey that the kid has been exposed, not just speaks, but been exposed to any language other than English at home, they will give him then an assessment to see whether or not he qualifies for English language services. Now, the thing about that assessment, sometimes it's honestly hard enough that even a native English language speaker could fail, yes.
Which would just eventually take them down that
exactly.
pathway.
And a lot of times, too, in the registration process, the person doing the assessment, they don't communicate to the family what a big deal it is. They'll just be like, this is something we do when you're registering, just a little test we give or whatever. And actually, there's financial incentives for the district to do that way, because when the kid is labeled as ESL, more money for the school. Yep. So families need to know. Now, if the kid genuinely, like, English is not his first language, he should be in ESL classes.
Okay.
But I'm of the opinion these young kids who are growing up, and for all they think in English, especially in early elementary school, they should be in the mainstream classes and not in ESL.
Yeah.
So that families need to know that, because a whole bunch of families have been fooled by that, essentially.
For sure.
Especially here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And another thing, too, is even if they don't fill out that survey correctly and the kid still gets the assessment and puts them in ESL, any family has the right to take the kid out of ESL services. A lot of a lot of parents don't realize that. They have a federal right to do that.
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
Yep.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's the same with special education as well.
Oh,
you have a right to take them
special
out.
education is probably a bigger one.
Yes,
that's really the next point that I wanted to talk about. Special education. A lot of young, especially in the Somali community, our young boys are really active.
Yes, I know.
And a lot of teachers see that as a form of disability, unfortunately.
I know. Well, I mean, this is the thing about special education, because a lot of things are classed in special education.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, even kids who are really advanced, such as a kid who skips a grade, those kids actually have to be they have to be classed as special education as well.
Oh.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Okay.
So special education encompasses a lot of things. Now, kids who have certain medical disabilities are going to be in special education, and they usually should be by their diagnosed medical disabilities.
Right.
Schools do not diagnose medical disabilities. No one in schools has the authority to do that or the expertise to do that, and they don't do that. Now, in special education, there are classifications such as reading disability or learning disability or emotional behavior. That can become a medical diagnosis, but some of those things, like, they can be classed that way in the school, but it doesn't mean the kid has a medical diagnosis.
Okay.
And yes, a lot of times these things are used, especially with the young boys, especially in elementary school, when the teacher doesn't know how to handle that kid properly. They weren't trained well, they themselves. You have to be very, very patient with kids to get them to respect you.
True.
So they're not earning the respect of kids, and the kids may be misbehaving in school or whatever, and special education can become a bin where you try to throw those kids into. And I've talked to families who've done that. Any family who that's the type of situation, I recommend that they refuse special education services, especially for kids where it's just like, well, he's having a behavior issue.
It's all behavior, especially, specifically speaking in the Somali community.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, I think, I don't know what it is. Naturally growing up.
Well, I know that's true.
Yeah.
But then the most common classifications for these would be ADHD and ADD.
Yeah.
And so this is immediately what they're like, oh, yeah, high energy, that's what he has.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes a kid may not even have that.
Right.
And then they're placed into those things. And so when you make them believe that they do, then they begin to even act a little bit differently themselves. It's just a whole mess.
Yeah, now that gets a little tricky because, families, what I would recommend doing, you want a doctor or a psychiatrist to diagnose ADHD. But what doctors and psychiatrists will do sometimes is they will ask for information from the school, and then they will take what the school tells them and calculate that into the diagnosis. So that is a hard thing about that. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard thing.
Yeah,
honestly, if I were counseling a family who was going through that, I would tell them to take them to the, actually, if they don't have any concerns about the kid outside of the school context, you shouldn't pursue that route, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because a kid who actually has a disability or something, they're going to exhibit those problems across contexts.
Yeah.
And actually, this is a whole thing in the Muslim community, because a lot of kids, when they go to Duksi or the madrasa, that is a separate context.
Yeah.
And if a kid is fine in one environment but not in the other one, it does suggest that it's not like a neurological
it's probably
problem.
most likely an environment issue.
Exactly. So families do need to know that. And and I, I wouldn't take it based on what the school says alone.
No, that's a great point.
No.
And families should not allow themselves to be pressured into putting the kid into special education.
And they will try to. Yeah,
they will. And special education teachers as well. If there's not kids labeled as special ed, they don't have a job. So they want kids labeled as special. Another thing, actually, too. So something that families need to know about special education: if a school is considering a kid for special education, they first need to notify the parents once they are considering it.
Yeah.
After they are considering it, they are whatever the issue that they say, it's a behavior issue, they are supposed to try to fix that issue with specific interventions for 12 weeks before they actually put them in special education.
Right.
They're supposed to be collecting data and information on what they're doing and reporting it to the parent the whole way through as well. Now, I did work at a charter school where they actually did that process very, very well.
Yeah.
A lot, and that charter school, it actually had more oversight than a lot of these districts do.
Okay.
A lot of times, district special education teachers, and again, the teachers union gives them protection, which gives them protection from accountability as well. A lot of times, they will greatly shortcut that process. They will inform the parent that they're considering it. They might wait 1 week or try one thing or this type of thing and say, we want to put them in special education. And special education teachers, they have a financial incentive to have more kids in special education. Because if they run out of kids being labeled as special ed, they won't have a job the next year.
And then probably the best targets are families who don't know the system very well.
100%.
And are immigrants.
100%.
And everything.
And especially in elementary school, when you're an elementary teacher and you have that one kid who's giving you a hard time, it seems so appealing to just have him, get him in a different room for most of the day, so he's away in the special ed room, that type of thing.
Unbelievable. All right, next thing that I want to discuss is there's generally a level of fitna that's,
there is.
engaging Muslim students in a public school environment. There's a general, a test of your deen, a test of your iman.
Totally.
How can we make sure Muslim students have the proper tools to succeed in this type of environment?
Well, look, I know I keep plugging my book and my program, and teachers can take my training through abrahameducation.com. They can sign up there. But look, firstly, there's accommodating religious practice. Now, Muslim kids in public schools in the West and teenagers, especially the children of immigrants, they've been put in a really hard situation because they themselves, most of them want to do it, and they have pressure from the religion, the community, the parents, all this psychological pressure to do it. But they have to, in order to do it, they have to do a type of advocacy that whereas that had to have been done before. If their parents grew up in the Muslim world, they didn't have to do that. Something I tell teachers in the training in the book, they have to understand the entire Muslim world is revolved around accommodating these practices. So you don't get effective accommodations when the school itself does not have a thorough understanding of what the prayer and what it all entails, that type of thing. So that type of education needs to be done proactively, because otherwise it's too hard for the kids and it's too easy for them to just justify and skip out.
True.
And then even when the school does try to accommodate it and they don't do it effectively, the kids end up misusing the time, this type of thing, and all types of animosity takes place. As far as other types of fitna, there's all types. I recommend parents, the best years to not have your kid in school, if you can't homeschool them the whole way through, is 4th through 8th grade. Those are, it's around it's around age 9, 10 where kids, they get a little bit more advanced awareness of their peers. That's when you first start to have kids thinking about the impression of other kids.
Okay.
So kids who misbehave under, 3rd, 4th grade, age 9 or so, it's usually a lack of impulse control, or it's like overstimulation, this type of things why they misbehave. It's age 9, 10, like about 4th grade, where you start having kids misbehave for the sake of impressing other kids.
That's true.
That phenomenon pretty much only increases up until about 9th grade. A lot of times into 9th grade, it's maybe around age 15 where kids start to try to turn a corner with that. I'd say around age 16, they mature to a point where they can start to connect with adults a little bit about that age. But the peer culture in those grades, from 4th through 8th, it just becomes extremely toxic. It's extremely toxic. And, American society itself does not have a handle on it. School, I would say teachers these days, they're more likely to give it. the kids who have the most social power in school, they're the kids who are the most into whatever is going on in pop culture,
Yep.
or the ugliest things going on in social media, and they're the kids who come into school and imitate those things the most.
Yeah.
And a lot of times these are the kids who have the most problems in their own background, and they're doing this type of behavior.
As a relief.
Yes, to reconcile their own emotional issues. And meanwhile, you have the other kids who they're feeling this peer pressure to act that way or act like that is cool as
They
everything.
literally run the school.
Correct.
Yeah.
And at those ages, when you have kids, in that environment 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 180 days out of the year, their own sense of self-worth and value becomes very attached to their success in that type of social environment.
Yeah.
So that's where you get, they'll start to have tension between, well, my parents want me to do one thing, but the social pressure is telling me to do another thing. And that is where nefarious forces are really ripe to take advantage of them. And all this type of stuff. So those are really the best ages to not have kids in school if you can. If not, and I have a parenting course on my channel as well on Abraham Education.
That's very important.
That I did this summer for free. I live streamed it every Saturday.
Mashallah.
One of the best things you can do to mitigate this type of thing with kids is talk about them what's going to take place in their own minds, their own psychology beforehand.
Before they go into
Yep. So that peer pressure that starts to creep in around 4th grade, you want to talk about that with the kid when they're in 2nd grade or
Okay.
early in
That's
3rd
interesting.
grade. You
That's
want to say to
interesting.
them, when you get older, you're going to start seeing kids disrespect the teacher. You're going to start hearing kids talk about things that as Muslims we don't talk about.
Yeah.
You have to know right now that those kids are doing that because they have their own emotional issues in their background. It's not because they're cool while they're doing it.
Right.
And when you see kids doing that, you want to stay away from it, and you want to come home and we'll talk about that type of thing. That way when kids see it, what it triggers in their mind is, oh, this is what mom and dad were talking about.
So this is important to frame it for them at that young age.
Correctly.
Right.
Yes.
No,
exactly.
this is good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it builds trust with the parents.
Okay, about that too.
Yes.
So it's cool to frame things for kids.
Yeah.
But also, it's probably equally as important to have a good relationship with your kids and be
100%.
active
Yeah.
in their lives.
Yes.
Because if you're just like, every now and then they see you and you're like, hey, by the way, watch out for this stuff. They're like, okay, yeah. Right. And just probably just ignore you. So, yeah. No, I wanted to add that part because you could be doing one thing and then not the other, and that could have like a devastating
and someone will
impact.
say to parents, the general advice that I always give, the way that you have success with kids, the way you build good relationship with them, also the way that you build authority with them, and the kids having a sense of authority is very important, is you have to be calm with them. And a big mistake a lot of parents make is they're too reactive and they're too and teachers make this mistake actually as well. They're too tense in how they react to them. So anyway, I'm sorry I keep plugging my things over and over again.
No,
but
keep
part of what I
plugging.
go
We
over
need
and
to
No, people need the
Yes.
resources.
They need to
That's
know.
why you're here.
what I go over in my parenting course on Abraham Education, the first thing I address with it is nonverbal communication. Like when a kid does something you don't want or they trigger you, this type of thing. Kids are annoying. Kids are inherently annoying to older people. They are.
Yeah.
So they trigger stress reactions in you all the time. Now, if you just operate on those stress reactions, you end up yelling at them, you end up scolding them, you end up shaming them, all this type of stuff, and that will break down the relationship over time. And that is where kids will lie to you a lot when they get into adolescence because they'll be too afraid of what you're going to do when you react to them. Now, you don't want to go to the opposite end of just letting kids do whatever they want or just I'm going to give you candy to do what I want or whatever, that type of thing. You don't want to do that either. That wrecks their motivation as well.
Yeah.
But they're, actually the people who dealt with the issue of behavior management in schools the best are people who looked at nonverbal communication the closest.
Okay.
And it's not the stuff most studied, but in my experience teaching, it is by far and away the stuff that's most valuable. So I put that stuff into a course on my YouTube channel because I want parents to know about it because a lot of it is really, really effective stuff for how you deal with your kids in a way where you get them to listen to you, you get them to respect you in a way that maintains authority with them.
Yeah, especially we just don't have the upper hand in the culture as
Correct.
well. So
Exactly, yep.
there's certain things we can't do already.
And also, too, there's so much pressure in the culture upon parents, essentially to not care about their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, you just have to let kids be who
Just
they
let
are.
them-
You just have to let them, find
explore,
their own, exactly, all that type of
find
stuff.
themselves.
Now, there's a degree to which that is true,
True,
but,
yeah.
as Muslims, and because we know the difference between right and wrong, we do have some specified boundaries we don't want our
Absolutely.
kids to cross.
Absolutely.
And we do have some specified outcomes that we want the kids to exhibit when they get older.
Yeah.
So we don't want to be on that train of just let them do whatever they want.
No.
And, and there is some good stuff in like parenting books by the non-Muslims and parenting psychologists type of stuff.
Which is,
But foundationally, this is a problem with
Yes.
it. It errs too much on the, let them find themselves, that type of thing.
Oh God.
No, we want to look at the stuff where it's
Subhanallah.
focused on maintaining the adult's
Absolutely.
authority, but doing it in a way where the relationship
I
is
think
maintained
it's
as well.
important. Not enough Muslims we don't do this work, so that's why we have to rely on external non-Muslim resources. But just
Good thing that we have people like Michael. Abraham
Michael,
stepping
and that's
up
why
and
we need you to
creating
keep
these
plugging
resources.
in, keep plugging in all your programs, inshallah.
Exactly.
But the what brings me to mind, and we have to mention this, is the Prophet ﷺ as a person, as a father figure, as a teacher, right? As someone who's a counselor. In his lifetime, he gave certain sort of advices to the kids. So and then what I find interesting is the ages in which he recommended. He said at the age 8, if they're not praying, discipline them to pray, right? And then when you look at the way he also deals with younger companions, when they are not doing what he wants them to do, he smiles, because he already has that great relationship. And so for them, they have like they admire him to a point where they don't want to disappoint him.
Exactly.
Right?
That's
And
exactly it.
So this is that sort of, and this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَذَكْرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. That the Prophet ﷺ in him is a
The best
a
example.
moderate, best example for you to follow, right? And people only think of it as just being a Muslim in the religious frame, but it's holistically, right?
Absolutely.
As a father, as a counselor, arbitrator, even general, you get to the military. So everything about him. And this is why it's important to know the Prophet ﷺ as a model for us. Because then in these situations it will help. Even what you're saying is the authority. Even though the Prophet ﷺ was nice and he was calm and but he always made sure that in his household he was the authority, right? And he didn't give that up. But his children respected him and they loved him and they admired him for it. So it's a certain way you do things. And so
And the thing is too, kids actually want an authority figure.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing too. Like it's really a mistake, especially with teenagers, to think that like they want to be left alone. That's a big mistake people make with teenagers a lot. They want to be approached the correct way, but they don't actually want to be left alone. And they want good advice, and they want guidance. They want to know the difference between what's going to work and what's not going to work. And they want to know the difference between right and wrong. They do. But, they only have so much control over their emotions is what it comes down to, and they only have so much control over their impulses.
Exactly.
It's just something that develops over time.
Yeah, but just understanding that helps too. And that's why the younger parents have that opportunity
100%.
to change that, the way things are going. So break that cycle. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. Just that if somebody wants to get this book, how can they get it?
Amazon.
Amazon now.
Yep.
Okay. So engaging with some students in public school, what educators need to understand. Michael Abraham. Is this your only book?
That's my only book, yep.
So we're hoping for the next one.
Inshallah, maybe a parenting
two.
one coming out before.
yes.
That's what I'm
I think
trying
that
to
would be
do,
key.
inshallah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So also your YouTube channel, inshallah, we're gonna link it below.
Yeah, please do. Jazakallah
That's the
khair.
best way people
Yep.
can reach
And
you.
So
right?
are you currently teaching as well? Or?
Yeah, I am. I'm go back to school on Monday. I'll go
Okay,
back
which
for-
school?
Heritage. It's
Heritage.
called Heritage STEM Academy now.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
close
Oh,
public
nice. You teach
schools.
over
Okay.
Heritage.
I teach
Okay.
at Heritage.
That's a
Sorry, too.
Yeah.
Everyone knows Heritage.
Mashallah.
Oh yeah, everybody.
Nah,
That's a
Allah
favorite
Ibarak
school.
Feekum. This is great work you're doing. May Allah assist you in it and make it easy for you.
Jazakallah khairan.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for having me on, brothers.
No,
It's
No,
been a
definitely.
pleasure.
This
Been a
was one of the
pleasure.
most powerful episodes that we've had because this topic we've never ever spoken on it on this platform here, and it's one of the most.
Extremely important.
I mean, beyond
Yeah.
important, subhanallah. And inshallah, and we need a part 2 in this. because
Inshallah.
I think now this was just like so much information one time.
Yeah.
Once we digest it and look through, and maybe I'll get to inshallah finish this book. After that, we can really like get into the detail work.
I look forward to it, inshallah.
Today was a lot of general stuff.
correct.
what the people want to hear.
No.
The next time we want to talk about what the people really need to know.
Exactly. Inshallah.
Yeah.
So it's been an honor having you.
Oh, it's been an honor being here. Jazakallah khair, boys.
Really appreciate it. Shout out to all of you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. And inshallah, let us know your thoughts. Leave the comments and feedback. Connect with engaging Muslim students in public schools. You can buy it from Amazon right up here. Okay, inshallah. We'll put the link maybe from Amazon link down below, inshallah. So people can get it.
And please refer educators to abrahameducation.com.
Abraham Education.
Okay, if your kid goes to school, please tell them to go to abrahameducation.com. The training I do is by the same name. Teachers, they get continuing education credits for doing the training. A lot of times teachers, they're more interested in the training than they are in the book.
Of course.
So please recommend that to if you're sending your kid back to school,
that's a must.
In the fall here, please recommend that.
That helps every teacher to better understand the Muslim students.
100%.
I mean, this is a work that's very, very needed. And so, Jazakallah khairan for your time today. I know it was last minute notice, and I really, really apologize.
It's all good.
Jazakallah khairan. Uthman, any last and closing statements?
I think this is an important topic, and it's actually good to shine some light on the work you're doing, and resources like this for the Muslim community here.
Yeah.
They need to be more aware of it, and we need to be more aware of how to handle these situations. Before it was haphazardly, and we were trying to just scribble and scramble. But if we're going to live in this country, we need to know how it works.
No.
Oh yeah.
And if we're going to have kids,
Yeah.
we need to know how the school and the education system works here.
Big time. Inshallah, close with that. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Until next time.